Hi everyone. We've given ourselves like 5 minutes to make sure that, everyone's in and ready to start. So welcome to our author talk with Yelena Moskovich about her new book, A Door Behind a Door. I'm Emily. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a student at University of Kent studying English and American literature. I'm very excited to be one of the moderators tonight. So over to you, Neda.
Hi everyone. My name is Neda. I'm a creative writing student with the University of Kent. I had the pleasure of having Yelena as my teacher for creative writing, and I'm beyond excited to be able to talk to her today about her new book. I think Emily and I both have learned a lot from her, and now are really excited to pick more at her brain. I'll be telling you a little bit more about Yelena before we start. Obviously, she's going to have the opportunity to talk about herself as well. But we just wanted to introduce her. We're going to be talking about her new book that came out in May in the US, and then she's going to be coming out next year in the UK and the European market. People who are based in Paris, you can buy it from Shakespeare & Co. She's also the author of The Natashas and the author of Virtuoso, which was longlisted for the Dylan Thomas Prize. Both fantastic books, and I'm very happy that you're soon going to be able to read the third one as well. Me and Emily had the chance to read it before it came out, and we're very happy about it. So Emily's going to read us a little bit of a little summary of the book, and then we'll have the pleasure of having Yelena read a little bit of it.
Yeah, so just quickly, I thought I'd read the little synopsis from the publisher, $2 Radio. And so they've written, in Yelena Moskovich's spellbinding new novel, A Door Behind a Door, we meet Olga, who immigrates as part of the Soviet diaspora of 1991 to Milwaukee?
Milwaukee, yeah, that was as close as, yeah.
So to them is Wisconsin. There she grows up and meets a girl and falls in love, beginning to believe that she can settle down. But a phone call from a bad man from her past brings to life a haunted childhood in an apartment building in the Soviet Union, an unexplained murder in her block, a supernatural stray dog, and the mystery of her beloved brother, Moshe, who lost an eye and later vanished. We get pulled into Olga's past as she puzzles her way through an underground Midwestern Russian mafia in pursuit of a string of mathematical stabbings. So if that doesn't set the scene for the book for you all perfectly, then I don't know what will. So just over to you, Yelena, for a reading of the first couple pages.
Thank you. I'm very excited because I just actually received my own copy today. So this is sort of what it looks like. And I guess before I read, I wanted just to show our immense invisible crowd, I take it, just thousands of people out there, what the pages look like, because basically I'm going to be talking probably a bit about the format, but as you can see, it's kind of broken down with, I don't know if it's like visible, broken down with like little title headings and kind of fragmented bursts of prose that kind of weave in and out of each other. So I'll be reading like just the first 3 pages, but that way you kind of get a visual for what you're going to be hearing as like a slightly different tempo than maybe novels as like a traditional novel. Okay. Nikki, Nikolai, floor 6. I was a fat baby. I was lying in my crib like an egg yolk. The old lady was upstairs on floor 6, her dining room above our bedroom. She dropped to the floor and made our ceiling lamp sway. Oh no, oh no, oh no. There was a punctured scream. It wheezed, it lacked its high notes. It fell out of her mouth like a dog's tongue. The boy, his footsteps were soft as rain and scared and stupid down the stairs. Goodbye, she was left to lie there, 3 wounds, her head flopped against her forearm, leaking. Floor 5. Nikolai Nishishvili lived on floor 5 like us. He was much older than me, but also far from adulthood, mulling, teenaged. He must have had a groin filling with pubic hair. A mother with eyes that could mourn raspberries, no father, and the street dog that he was supposed to leave alone, Vaska. He snuck him in and gave him meat bones and let him sleep under his bed every now and then. Listen, like us, they were nothing special. Everyone knew, but the old lady, she was different. She was good. I'm sorry. I can't say her name. I'm afraid I'll call her back from the dead. No one who has left this world unjustly comes back with a clear head. Let's just call her the old lady, okay? Misery had already come to her. She wore the black veil for her one and only son who drowned in Odessa at age 10. Her husband had just passed away a couple years before, an immune system anomaly. They say men leave. They say women mourn. She lived our proverbs. But you know what? She didn't grow bitter. She didn't become hard. She continued to look fondly at children because all children were innocent in her eyes, even the child who accidentally horseplayed her son to death that August years ago, even the one who would grow up to be the poor soul to stab her thrice. Nikki, Nikki, softness, how long must we carry it as affliction? Speak up. Nikki was 14 when I was just over a year old. I watched him from my mother's arms with my globular brown eyes. He was cuffed. He was smacked around by the militsioner, the cop. His mama ran down the stairs crying, mama's tears. He's just a boy. He's just a boy, but boys don't stab old women once, twice, thrice. That, my daragaya mamasha, is intentional manslaughter, the cop said. But he didn't mean it, she's crying. Of course he didn't mean to. Just ask him, she's spreading her fingers wide into the officer's face. It was an accident. The cop turns to the boy, he pushes him against the railing. He says, speak up, malchik, did you mean it? Bad boy. Nikki was a bad boy and he went to prison to become a bad man. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I think it was very, very nice to hear your own pacing of it because, as you said, I think we also are very interested to talk to you about the format. Especially, I mean, I have a few questions about it. I think Emily has some as well. Because reading it, you obviously have to kind of pause on the titles that kind of bleed into it, and it creates a really nice pacing that I think even if I hadn't heard you, it really did mimic what I had in my mind when I was reading it. I don't know about Emily, but it was really nice to kind of hear it be read out slowly.
Yeah. Oh, that's good to hear that you kind of read the same in your head.
Yeah. I think it did. I think also the kind of breaks between the paragraphs helped as well. I think also one of my first questions was actually, it's a little bit broad, but I was very interested to ask you, like, how long did it take you to write it?
Yeah, so this one is actually, it's quite a curious process because it started out as a short story that I wrote maybe like 6 years ago, just a really long time ago, and I really loved it. And it was kind of an awkward length to be submitting to it was like maybe 8,000 words or something like that, which is like that weird terrain of like unpublishability in the kind of magazine world. So it was a little too long, a little too awkward in form. So I sent it out to just a handful of magazines, and then I was really excited about it, and the magazines begged to differ. And so I was like, okay, well, it looks like it's not going to be published. So just kind of put it in the drawer. And I was working on some other projects. And then a couple of years back, I think like a lot of authors do, they sort of shuffle through like, okay, what do I have in the drawer? Like, what can I start sending out? And then I just kind of opened up the short story and I was like, oh, I remember writing this. And I started reading it, and just, even on the second page as I was reading it, I just started kind of like rewriting, elongating, like it's almost like the universe sort of opened up, and I was like, oh, I understand, like this is supposed to be a novel. That's what it was. That's what it was waiting for. And then from then it actually went quite quickly. I would say it took me maybe like from that point, maybe a year to get it together. Yeah.
So were you finishing it during the pandemic, or was it done before?
Yes, I was. I finished, I finished right I believe it was like April or May. So really like the first couple months of the during the lockdown. So the lockdown actually came in, you know, like was a bit of a blessing in disguise, because I was like, oh great, I need to I need to finish this novel. So yeah.
Did it look so when you say like a short story, did it still have the separation between the voices? It was just
Yeah.
short pieces.
Yeah. So the form was the same. It was just kind of I think it didn't like pan out as much, and we didn't see like I think I don't remember if Tanya was like a very small role, like some of the other roles that really get their own sections. Even, you know, there's a dog that has like, that's maybe like a supernatural dog that comes from a different dimension. That dog has his own like chapter, like, so there's kind of a lot more that unfolded, but the shape, sort of the tempo of it and the structure of it was always the same. Yeah.
That's very interesting. I don't think if I can imagine it in a shorter version.
Yeah. It actually, to me, it felt like it worked, but it beckoned for more. And I'm glad that I kind of put it aside for a bit, and then we found it and was able to kind of figure it out in its fullness.
So in terms of the format, having like obviously sat down and had to write something for you as well, I was very interested to ask you whether you sat down and had the format in your mind before you had the content in your mind, or was it the other way around?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, actually, because I think probably anyone that does sort of non-traditional like writing, often sort of we want to know like where that format came to be. And I think, I don't know how it is for others, but for me, the format or the form is the writing. It's like, I need to know before I write anything, I need to sort of have a feel for sort of the atmosphere of the book. And for me, the atmosphere is very much its tempo. It's very much sort of the lighting. Like I can usually see what kind of lighting or colors are going on. Like maybe I'm a very visual kind of cross sensorial person, but I usually can see it very clearly, but not in necessarily a cinematic way. I'm more like an installation. Like there's already a room where the whole novel exists as an installation, and I can and I if I were, you know, in a museum and I kind of were to go into that room, I would experience that installation. And then when I decide like, yes, this is what I want to kind of unfold into a novel, then it's finding like basically the equivalent language, even something as page layout that feels true to the way that kind of imaginary installation hit me. So a lot, and because maybe I'm a visual person, I think it's quite important to me how the page is set up, and I like a lot of breathing room. So even my other novels are quite, you know, fragmented, and there's just a lot of breaks. So yeah, I don't know if that's a bit of a vague response.
I don't think it's vague.
Okay.
I could kind of imagine what you meant. I think it does have a lot to do with how your own process and how you sit and imagine everything, and you have to know the world before you kind of put it out there for other people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, something I was wondering, which you've briefly touched upon already, is obviously there are so many different characters in this excellent book, and most of them seem to have their own specific section. So I was just wondering how you decided which characters would get their point of view kind of shared in the books, and which ones maybe you chose to omit, and was that on purpose? Like, was it a conscious decision to include some characters and maybe not so much others?
Yeah, well, I think I kind of, when I write, I basically write in chronological order, even though usually the treatment of time is everywhere. But I think for me, the characters that come out and that take, you know, X amount of space, that's just sort of fitting within the movement and within the dynamic that the work itself is moving in. So it's not really a choice that I would make beforehand, and definitely, and even if I would, the novel would probably go against me and would do its own thing. But yeah, I think it's more, you know, as I'm writing, I feel like I started out with Olga and Nikki, and those were sort of the two principal ones, especially in the short story. It just kind of went back and forth between them. But in this one, as I was sort of unfolding it, it's just these kind of, I don't know, it's like a voice pops up and then unfolds, and then it's a whole chapter. And then from there, because it's, like a lot of the either moments or symbols or kind of even monologues like echo each other. So sometimes it's a question of call and response. Like there's a chapter that is itself autonomous, but it's also a call. And so right away I hear what response needs to come at a certain point in order for it to have some sort of cohesion, because it doesn't have that traditional sort of linear cohesion.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I guess I was also wondering if any of the characters in this book or any of your works, are they kind of based on people you know, or do you like to kind of think completely outside of the box and almost go against anyone you know for fear of kind of including anyone too much? What's the kind of process there?
Well, the only character that's for sure based on someone I know is the dog, the supernatural dog. No, I'm just kidding. No, actually, yeah, the dog, the dog is definitely based on, at least feeling wise, about a dog that I remember, but not in the Ukraine, not in Ukraine, it was in Israel, where I lived briefly. But no, actually, I think for me, that's the thing about fiction is, of course, it's, it has to do, like, if any of my close friends and or my therapist were to read this, they would say, okay, like they definitely would see so much. But I think part of what I enjoy about writing is to have that freedom to go wherever I want, because I'm sort of, I have all my costumes. It feels very theatrical. Maybe it's because I come from theater, and even I had a brief moment when I was an actor, and I always like wanted to play like a monster or like something that was just, that was so significantly different from me, where I didn't feel seen in a way. And I think the same is for novels. I think that there's just another world that I want to kind of let exist. And oddly enough, I feel very private about my own world. Like I would, if like, I don't know, if someone were to guess that this is kind of like this person, I would probably feel a bit flustered and say like, no, they're not, So I kind of like that it's like it's my secret. Yeah.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I guess my next question kind of what was leading on from that was, I noticed that obviously Olga in the novel also moved to America in 1991.
Yeah.
Kind of similarly echoes your story. So would you say you try and imbue these characters with like some autobiographical elements, or they just kind of slip in naturally?
Yeah. No, I think that was, I think because this, in a sense, this novel is like all great Russian literature. It's about going to hell, which one of my favorite themes. And I think that sort of that hero's journey, if you will, the anti-hero's journey of going to hell, for me is very akin to sort of the emotional journey of the immigration process, especially when it happens like between a certain age, or for, when you're still a kid. There's this, it's a very kind of supernatural experience, and there's a lot of things that are interpreted a certain way that kind of create their own, that have a certain narrative when you're that age, that later you realize like, oh, okay, that was actually, it was so painful to be able to understand the situation in this way, that I had to codify it in this way. And so I think part of my interest in talking about, and doing a story about going to hell is also, which is a story about, in a sense, immigration, is a story about trying to figure out sort of your own psychic codification of the kind of the unvisited traumas. And so, I think Olga has that, that literal immigration, as a lot of the characters are either immigrants or, also a lot of them are maybe dead and alive and dead multiple times. And But I think it's, yeah, creating this underworld and creating this sort of like this like kind of Russian mafia that intersects with this like supernatural queer world that, you know, intersects with maybe some sort of metaphysical thriller. I think that was a way for me to be able to use a genuine element of my biography and feel that I could talk about it in a true way, because I feel like if I had to use a realist or naturalist sort of palette for it, then it wouldn't do it justice, because that experience for me was so otherworldly, was so supernatural, and I can't even use like a, you know, like a very structured, I even have to like break a sentence in order for it to feel like it does justice to my experience, because it doesn't feel like language was cohesive at that time.
I think it's very interesting that you said Underworld, because near the end, I think that's exactly how I felt. It does obviously start, and you're not really sure where it's going to go, and you haven't read the section with the dog yet, and you haven't really experienced people dying or maybe dying, and then kind of the resurrection part. And it starts, I'm not going to say as a normal narrative, but it starts and you don't know what to expect, and then near the end, I think you do get this sense of this is something that, you know, it is created, but it's also very solid, and I didn't feel lost or anything. And I think maybe because, as you said, like it has to do with you know, similar to all Russian narratives, it did have something very familiar to me, and something very like not foreign in a way. And that was it was very nice to read in that format, in a format that's not really like a long Russian text. And I think one of the things that was very interesting to me was the way you handled language. And I think because it's kind of this, you know, mixture of, we know when the characters are supposed to be talking in Russian, and then when they're supposed to be talking in English, but obviously the majority of the text is in English. And then you have just a few words, and I wanted to ask you, I was very interested in how you navigated that, and how you picked like which words to kind of translate and leave even in the dialogue that obviously would be in Russian, since, for example, when they're sitting in the booth, and you have to point out Nikki's English, but the whole conversation so far has also been in English.
Yeah. I think for me, I mean, I started out in playwriting and in theater. So I love voices and I love dialogue. And so I think part of it is just kind of that I take so much joy in doing it, and I hear my characters so pristinely. So I kind of, and also, you know, I grew up like, even with my family, we always talk, it's like a mixture of English, Russian. So I'm kind of used to, it doesn't feel like I have to sit down and think about where I would place that word. Like it actually, it's a more of a natural expression of those voices that I hear that would kind of throw in, you know, this word or that word. Obviously I have a bit more fun with it, like, you know, without giving too much away, but there's, you know, Tanya, who's like my kind of like my Sarah Kane character, who's she's basically like really angry and really horny at the same time, which is such like a huge part of being a teenage immigrant in the middle of nowhere. But her and her bestie Sveta, like they have this really weird relationship where they just kind of like hate each other and love each other at the same time. And so even the way that they kind of like, when, you know, there's a moment where they're fighting and they're just kind of like, I decided like a lot of the kind of swear words or like the insult words that they're throwing around at each other are Russian, because there's like something, you know, it's not the same thing if you call someone like a bitch or a slut as you do it like in that sort of native language. And it's this weird thing, because even though they're having this kind of violent moment, because they're using the most kind of violent words in their kind of native or secret language, it becomes also at the same time a form of intimacy between them. So I think there's something about creating this type of like a sort of a different like proximity or intimacy with the reader, that even though, yes, you don't speak this language, but it's not like I'm withholding information from you. Actually, there's something that feels very close, very familiar, very like, wow, you know me so well that you're going to throw that this is our word, you know. And so I think I like that feeling, as I like playing with that feeling, with having the different registers as well, with having something, because a lot of the novel can be, you know, quite poetic, and it has more of a higher register. And so I like playing with kind of this more like the garbage throwaway language, and then this very kind of like warm kind of, you're like, you know me, these are our words, type of language as well.
I think it works very well, and I think even I enjoyed a lot even the paragraphs which, like the one you said where they kind of start fighting, the two girls, even the ones that had more Russian words in one paragraph, because they're not, you know, usually in the rest of the book I think they're quite sparse in between, they're not really overwhelming. But I think even in that paragraph, even if you didn't know the words, I don't think you needed to go and kind of check what they meant. Which does create this form of, I think, kind of trust in the reader. I did know most of them, but for the ones that I didn't, I did feel like, oh, you trusted me to figure it out, and I did, and it created this, like, I think we could feel their intimacy and their kind of closeness, and it worked really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't get really any of the Russian words myself, but I could get the kind of sense of what you were going for. And something else about the language that struck me that you just mentioned was kind of the really poetic sections that really justified with the kind of violence of some of the book. Especially when you were reading it out just then, like the kind of lyricism really came across to me. And so I was wondering, like, in some of the phrases, like one that really got me right at the start was eyes that could mourn raspberries. I just thought that was so beautiful, and it really touched something inside of me. So I was wondering, like, do these kind of really poetic phrases just come to you, like, I don't know, when you're in the shower, or do you just have to like really think about them and really workshop them? What's the kind of thought process, and what do you go through there?
I think it's I think probably it has more to do with the sort of the initial kind of atmosphere or installation, or I would say like my initial connection with the essence of the story that I'm telling, because that from there's also a specific language that is born, a specific register, or like a number of registers, because usually I really like playing with contradictions, and I really like like, for me it's all about, you know, I talked about the call and response, and I think there's something syntactical as well in the call and response. And I think there's, you know, I, not just in this novel, but a theme that's, you know, really important to me that I often talk about is violence, and that sort of that kind of invisible form of violence that feels like inescapable in a sense, no matter the violence that comes out of violence, the violence that comes out of kindness, the violence that, you know, comes out of passivity, like it just, that you're kind of trying to you're trying to separate things. You're like, okay, no, this is poetry, this is vulgarity, this is the divine, this is the prosaic, and it just keeps like kind of sticking and mushing into each other. And it's it feels like that maybe is like a metaphor for just like language at large, or being a human trying to navigate your sense of humanity, or like your sense of, you know, like, okay, how do I, if I want to be a quote unquote good person, how do I navigate all these things that are in me, which includes the violence, which includes, you know, all these other things. And I think the kind of good bad theme also comes out a lot, which is for me, it's not so much like a kind of like a moral idea, like, you know, a moral good versus a moral bad, but I think it goes back to something that's more on the level of the linguistic, which is that, you know, you know, everything has its entity, and then it has its shadow. And then when you look at something, you know, when you look at something from one side and you're like, okay, that's what it is, and then you go somewhere else, you look at like someone's profile, and then you go and then you see a whole different person, you know. And I feel like language is the same. And so for me, that it's almost like a way of looking, like there's a certain poetic essence that that comes out when I'm thinking about like a character's solitude, you know, and they're having this moment of just really profound disconnection, like beyond the moment, but like, why, you know, like why am I here? And maybe do I not have it in me to make the type of connection that I wanted to feel like I matter, you know? And I feel like even that thought, if you think about it, that can be that same person that you're looking at. So like on one side, it's this, you know, for that feeling, you feel that pity. It's almost a poetic pity or a compassion, you know. And then from another side, you look at it and you see the anger behind that. You see that, like, what the fuck? Like, why the fuck was I born, you know? And so it's that side. And then you see another side, and it's just that, you know, that just gritty insecurity that like, I don't even want to be looked at, you know? So I think for me, it's that with language, and it's that with how to kind of get at characters, get at feelings, that it's not so much thinking about it as like, okay, this, now I'm going to be poetic, now I'm going to be lyric, because at the same time, I think some of the most lyric moments are sometimes where there's like a vulgarity that's kind of like turned on its head or something. But I think it's just being able to look at things from all sides, and to have contradictions just exist at the same time, you know, to have something be really beautiful and really disgusting at the same time, you know, or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's something that makes the language of this book so kind of multifaceted and like interesting, and something where you can read it through once and you have a certain understanding of it, and then maybe you go back through it again, and then things hit you in a different way, and you're like, well, I didn't see that the first time. I didn't think about it like that.
Yeah,
it's really interesting.
Yeah,
I think you definitely get the sense of the poetic feeling coming, the poetic words coming, like, and being charged a lot with a lot of emotions and a lot of feeling. And I think it is coming really closely together with the vulgarity, and I think it makes it work really well. Especially since I don't know about reading it, to me, surprisingly in the beginning, I don't think I would have expected it, but one of the most poetic voices to me in the end was Tanya. And I think that happened throughout, and like more towards the end when we actually did her own voice. And I think all of the emotions shining through there were kind of the strongest for me personally. And I think that kind of made me think as well. It's obviously a little bit of a, I think, not that good of a question, but I was wondering, did you have a favorite part to write, a favorite voice to write? Since they are so very different, in my opinion, as you're reading them and experiencing them, I could imagine like there would have been a difference writing them as well.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I would definitely say Tanya is one of my favorites. And I think it's kind of, I think also what gets me really excited about voices like Tanya is that I feel like she's sort of like ripping apart language. And so it's something like I wanted to say like anger, like I really like finding sort of a linguistic essence for female and queer anger. And so I was like, oh yeah, that must be it. But it's actually, it's not so much like the emotion of anger, it's that she actually manifests, she makes language angry. And that is really exciting. So I think it was starting out with this kind of trying to dig around with this essence of anger, you know, what is the anger of also like of kind of puberty and teenage girls. And it's really hard, you know, it's like even that, you know, it's a very kind of sensitive topic to talk about the sexuality of a minor, especially of a minor girl. But at the same time, it's like, yes, but but young girl, anyone that's been a girl knows that, we are sexual beings. We don't just start that when we reach the legal age, and then all those feelings. But before, because we don't have any sort of, that we don't have any space to have that sort of energy. We don't have space to be sexual, and we don't have space to be angry. So where do those energies go? And I feel like those energies are actually quite connected. And so, yeah, it's also, it was very thrilling, I think, for me to really figure out, like, what are the words that are going to actually, like, burst this open and actually make this kind of like a living thing, and not just language that tells you about someone's anger.
It was also very exciting to read, and it was very, I think, different from a lot of different things that we've read. And I think it surprised me how much and how many different views of the female identity you can kind of find in the text. But also not only female identity, but also this dual identity between being an immigrant and also having yourself be split. But the way I read it as well, having yourself be, you're not really split because you're both of them at the same time. And I think it's one of the themes in your writing, in this writing, that I kind of connected to the most, was this also coming through the language as well, and mixing the language as well, but also coming through the feelings of being here and there, and what here and there is. And I think one of the questions was how close to you was that to write, and how difficult was that to write, or easy? I don't know.
Yeah, it wasn't, I feel like I have a pretty good intuitive sense of how close I need my work to be to me. And so I don't, and I think also because most of what I write is kind of, takes the shape of a world that resembles our own, but has, it's kind of specific, either magical, realist, or supernatural, or however you want to name it, qualities. So that in itself, there's always like a formal and atmospheric distancing, I think, between me and the work. So I felt very, I would say it's, in general, I would say it's much easier for me to write than to live. I think living is a much more difficult thing to navigate. Like when I sit down and I write, I feel like, oh, okay, here I am. Like I know this is the space, and I feel like I have this infinite patience. I'm like, okay, of course I get lost and I'm not sure, but I'm like, that's okay. This is, and I'll find, like, I'm like, that's okay, you'll find it. It's like, I forgot there was a psychologist that said, like, what is trust? And it's confidence in the unknown. And I feel like I've really, maybe like from a very early age, I have that with my writing. And then oftentimes, like, I think about, man, I would love to have that, like, in my life, to think about, like, obviously it's the same unknowns, to be like, can I have that same patience? Can I have that same, like, this is because we're all creating stories. So yeah, I would say it's not like easy or hard in the same, like, I think maybe those words don't quite fit it, but I would say writing is very intuitive, and it's not mentally charged, actually. And I would say maybe it's because I'm like an overthinker. I would think like I feel like I'm using a lot of mental energy to live. And when I write, I feel like I'm doing probably the equivalent of dancing, like I'm not in my head,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think kind of on the similar vein as the diasporic identities that Neda was just talking about. I mean, it's Pride Month, would be remiss not to mention the kind of queer identities of a lot, if not all, of the young people in the novel. So I was just kind of hoping you could speak to that a little bit. And something that I really found interesting was this kind of notion of like found family, which is obviously such a big thing within the queer community. And also something that I noticed was like a kind of generational divide, I suppose, where it seemed like a lot of the older characters, I mean, their sexualities I presumed were heterosexual, but then a lot of the younger ones did have these queer identities that they were trying to navigate. So I was just hoping you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's sort of this cross section, like anyone who's like gay or queer and an immigrant. It's the weird cross section where you're kind of on the one hand between the old world and the new world, and then also between sort of two different like formats of sexuality and understandings of like of sexual connection and expression. And I think I think culturally it really depends on, you know, like how that kind of the old world culture had that understanding and the new world has that understanding. But I think in this specific book, when we're thinking really about the East and West, sort of like the Soviet bloc East and then the Western, like Europe and North America West, I think that there's I think there's a big question of kind of complacency, because there's the character of Oksana that becomes crazy mama who like loses her son and her husband, and just like a lot of tragedy that comes to her and that continues to have faith as this sort of like martyr character. It doesn't necessarily have to do with her sexuality, but I feel like she's one of kind of the archetypical like Soviet characters where you just kind of have faith but you don't know what you have faith in. And it's with this weird thing that I think was asked of like citizens in the Soviet Union to have faith in a country that has no faith, like to have faith in a country that doesn't have religion. So it's like, what do you, obviously it's like have faith in the state, but even the construction of faith, what does it mean? Because usually faith has to do with, you know, with something that's with a certain connection or trust to something that it's untangible or invisible. But there it's like they're kind of mixing metaphysics with politics or something concrete, like have faith, this like invisible expression, with something very concrete, which is like the institutional structure. So I think like, even though that's maybe sounds a bit like far away from, you know, queerness or sexuality, but I felt like there was quite a similarity in terms of just how, you know, like what steps are you going to take to try to figure out who you are and understand yourself, and then where do you kind of trust how others view you, or the mirror that's, you know, that's given upon to you. And I think part of that is like the younger generation is, sometimes you can think of it as almost like a privilege to, you know, it's a privilege to have the time to be introspective, to you know, think about like, oh, how, you know, who am I, what do I desire, how do I want to express myself. At the end of the day, though, it's not a privilege, it's just like a very human state. And I think that unraveling, like it's a very hard thing between the two generations, because if the younger generation says like, no, it's actually not a privilege for me to want to, not only want to, but to demand to find a genuine expression for my desire, for my partnerships, etc. And then the older generation says like, no, you like, but we didn't get it, why do you get it? And then it's this sort of, it's like, who wants to hold the pain? Because if it's not a privilege, that means a whole generation was denied a basic human state. Like my parents' generation, they never, and also like maybe of that, the Soviet Union, they never could ask what they really even wanted. Even if they were, you know, straight, they couldn't really venture into like what they wanted, like sexually or romantically, or in terms of companionship or family format or things like that. And that's sort of this like the blind faith that they lived that then is broken. So it's like the new generation comes in as a sort of like Nietzsche with like, God is dead. And they're like, no, God, I mean, we know that God doesn't exist, but you need to believe in him in this way. This is a very kind of like serpentine answer to the question. So maybe I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great answer.
I think talking about new generations, one of the things that we wanted to kind of ask you at the end was if you have any advice for young writers and what maybe kind of your best advice would be for young writers.
Yeah, I would say that it probably has a lot to do with your relationship to yourself as a human being, because that, it's like, so there's the craft of writing, and that, like, you can learn through practice, through courses, also through community, through things like that. But then there's the essence of who you are as a person, and sort of where you're going to grow to, and what depths you're going to have, within yourself. And that, I at least believe, is quite exponential, and it's for us to really decide, like, what is our space in this life. And so I would say, like, to anyone that wants to be a writer or creator, is make sure to really, like, get to know, like, not even cultivate is like already 5 steps ahead. Like, whoa, like, you have to know what you're cultivating. You can't just be like planting and watering left and right. You don't know if you're growing weeds or, so it's like, first of all, like, slow down and really try to just get to know and continue to get to know who you are and how things make you feel. And, like, if there's something that evokes a bit of anger, like, what is this anger about? And what, I don't know, it's like a very kind of, in a very minute way, but I would say, like, the most important thing is to really develop a lot of kindness and compassion and patience for your own personhood, because that will allow you to have a lot of expansion, and that will allow you to use whatever skill sets you learn in, then if you do whatever practice or courses or whatever, you'll use those with whatever depth you have to bring to that tool. So yeah, I think it's that, because so much, and why I mentioned sort of like compassion and kindness, because those words can mean like everything and nothing. It's really important because we are the ones that kind of cut ourselves down, and that actually, we think we do it in the name of discipline, but it has nothing to do with discipline. It's actually shortening our capacity to be great writers. So oddly enough, I think we grew up with a false notion that you have to be really tough, and like tough on yourself, tough on the work. You just got to do it to be a good writer. But that actually prevents you from being the type of writer that you really could be. And oddly enough, it's that sense of kindness and compassion and understanding, which isn't laziness, it's something else, but it's, you feel it in yourself. It's hard to pinpoint, but yeah, I would say that would be my advice.
No, yeah, I think that's really good advice and really useful to, like, anyone out there who might be considering becoming a writer that feels like they have to have like a certain work ethic or something. It's just like, know yourself first, and then you'll know more about the kind of content that you want to write.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think for the last 10 minutes, we're going to switch it over to some audience questions. So we've had one in from Alice, who says, Supernatural Dog reminds me of Bulgakov. Are you inspired by his work or that of any other Russian writers?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think a lot of things in this book are sort of nods to a lot of almost like Russian literary tropes. So there's like a bit of Bulgakov, there's like a bit of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, and also the form of it was one of my inspirations is, growing up in like with Russian literature, like Pushkin is kind of our like Shakespeare. So everyone reads it and he's just like idolized, and especially Eugene Onegin, which is sort of a novel written in verse. And I always like this like novel written in verse format. So even my kind of fragmented, almost kind of lyrical form is a nod to like that kind of Russian novel written in verse. But definitely, I think that also there's a lot of like kind of winks to Crime and Punishment, the novel. And I kind of like to play around with that, and also in a sense to like queerify Russian literature, because it's so canonized, but it feels like so almost like overly sacred. And there's something that I like about almost like spray painting a little over it and then making it my own. And thinking about, because also growing up with like Russian literature, there's like a bit of, there's not much queer representation. There's like a little hint of something, but I always wondered like, what would like, I don't know, Gogol be like or like, what would Dostoevsky be like if it was like a queer novel,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important as well in like, the modern day to kind of consider what might have been like an alternate history almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So another question from Nicoletta is, if you were to name 3 major themes in your work, what would they be?
I would say probably, well, violence for sure. Like soul versus body. And the like the length of human time, like how long is long, how short is short, like sensation of time. Yeah.
That's so interesting about the kind of sensation of time, because I feel like it moves quite fluidly throughout your work. Sometimes really slowly, but sometimes really, really quickly, and it's like all jam-packed into one.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think time was something very interesting, because you're not really sure how long the novel is spanning, and how long it's actually like a day, and how long it's actually, there's very little mention of time, and I think that makes it even flow even kind of faster and slower at the same time, which is wonderful.
Yeah, I think it's actually, speaking of time, I feel like it's this often people say like, oh, it has this dreamlike quality, or it's very dreamy, but I always think it's really curious, because the way that we live our days, like if you start to be aware of like how long something feels and how short something feels, you start to feel really like you're almost hallucinating, because you're like, this is insane. Like a moment can feel so long, and yet like when we write, or when we seek to sort of portray like a character going through time, we have this notion, like we measure it in this like really scientific way, and it actually has nothing to do with the reality. Like actually real time is much closer to a dream than we think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that was probably the last question that we have time for.
Okay.
So, Yelena, would you like to briefly promote yourself to the audience? Let them know, your book, where they can find you on social media, all of you.
Yes. Thank you so much, by the way, for these wonderful questions. So yes, you can. This is my wonderful, beautiful third baby. So you can find it if you're in Paris at Shakespeare and Company, and then if you're in America at your local indie bookstore, which I highly urge you to do, like to try to go to an indie bookstore and support them. And then if you're not in America, unfortunately, it's only available online. So even though I hesitantly say Amazon, I didn't say it, but there you get the hint. And you can find me on social media on Instagram at Yelena Moskovich, and on Twitter at Yelena Moskovich.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
If you want to tune into our final Paris Festival event tomorrow, it's the Mentor launch of our much anticipated magazine with lots of excellent poetry and artwork. I think that's at 7 p.m. tomorrow on Zoom, so everyone should check that out as well.
We'll be waiting for you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, speak to you guys soon.
Bye. Bye.